This series of sharing on international standards for community development is going to be an ongoing process. We have had 2 series so far. One hosted from this side of the region, hosted with me and Anna Clark for the Western Hemisphere, so to speak, and another one hosted from Oceania by Dee and Michelle. And I'm glad that I'm seeing colleagues from Oceania actually joining us. And we are going to have an edition later this year and another edition early next year. And so we recognize the importance of standards in community development, and that's why we are giving it prominence as IACD. And so we are glad that you can join us. And so we'll go through the presentation. We are going to be co-presenting myself, Janine, and DeWitt. And then later we'll have an opportunity for us to discuss and see where we take this discussion forward in terms of promoting standards of community development practice. The whole idea is not so much to provide some kind of a template, which is a straitjacket for community development, but to have some kind of basics and some agreed upon minimums through which we can say when this happens, this is responsible, sustainable community development. And so the standards are not prescriptive. What they are just guides for our practice and guides for our discipline, which then those who are in academics and those who are in practice can be able then to adopt and use them to make what we do in our community development practice a lot more responsive and also respectful, and also promote the dignity of us as practitioners and the dignity of the communities that we work with. And so if we can go to the presentation, I'll take a bit and then we'll come back to the standards substantively. I want to start by introducing IACD, where, go to the next slide. The International Association for Community Development, so that we have a common understanding who we are for those who are joining us for the first time, is that we are a global network for professional community development practitioners. And our presence is in 70 countries across the globe. And if you take into account, we have about 150 plus countries globally, then we have presence close to half of the global countries. We have accreditation with the United Nations, and therefore we are able to have a voice in the fora in many of the activities that take place, including releasing statements on topical issues. And we are governed by a board of trustees who are elected from amongst the members. And so as we are inviting you to join us, that again gives you an opportunity also to have a voice and be able then to take this organization forward, and therefore also make an imprint in how community development is projected globally and as well as also regionally. As an organization, we subscribe to principles of good governance, and for purposes of administrative anchoring, we are registered as a Scottish charitable incorporated organization with the Scottish Charity Regulator, who we report to, and of course they oversight us for purposes of governance. And for that account, then we're operationally based in Scotland, and we also benefit from Scottish government support to cover some of operational expenses. Next slide. As an organization, we have an understanding that community development is practiced by people who apply community development values and methods in different roles, in different contexts. And therefore, we are not talking about a confined practice, a confined discipline. We accept that in as much as you are using the values and methods of community development in whatever role you are in whatever context you are already in community development and working for change in your communities, promoting community development as a professional community development worker having a role that is assigned to you, and also as professionals in occupations which go beyond what we might confine as community development. And therefore, community development is also used by disciplines beyond the social dimensions that we normally use in community development. In the health sector, we have community work, community development in place. Social workers have community development as one of their methods alongside casework and group work. We have still people also working in the built environment, where again, increasingly we are talking about communities of place, and therefore then is a discipline that has a wide application, and therefore that's why we are finding some convergence in terms of the common values that we subscribe to in our work, and also the methods that we apply as we operationalize our work and interact with the communities. The next slide. As IACD, we have a vision to be a collective and a globally connected community development of practice, where we are founded on and leading to community empowerment, equality, human rights, social justice, participative democracy, and sustainable development, which are the anchor values that and foundation also principles that guide our work as community development. And as an organization, we have our mission is to go out and then promote the discipline as a value-based community development practice, where ultimately we are talking about community empowerment. And of course, we also facilitate networking and also shared learning opportunities. And this is where we are coming in with this series of training, so that then we can enlarge our network and also enlarge the understanding around the practice of community development. Next slide. We subscribe to a common understanding of community development through a definition that was adopted in 2016 after quite an extensive consultation across the networks. And these are definitions that increasingly now is finding its place amongst the most quoted definitions of community development. And from our end, we see community development as a practice-based profession and also an academic discipline, meaning an area of work, an area of understanding, an area of knowledge, which can be promoted, and also research can be carried on to further that knowledge. But this is a profession and a discipline that is promoting participative democracy, sustainable development, human rights, economic opportunity, equality, and social justice, so that again we can have fairness in all the processes that we undertake. And for us to do this, then we promote the discipline and the practice through organization, through education, and also empowerment of the communities, where we recognize that these communities could be communities that are located in geographical spaces, or communities that are brought together by a common identity, or they share a common interest. And of course, we also are alive to the fact that we have communities that are urban-based, and also we have communities that are rural-based. Next slide. And so the values I've talked about, largely we can put them in clusters for purposes of just a graphic presentation: participative democracy, human rights, community empowerment, the issue of sustainability, which is becoming quite important now that we are talking about issues of climate justice in view of the extreme weather events. And then the issue of social justice, taking into account the kind of challenges that society is going through, and therefore impacting the extent to which communities are able to operate as organized, coherent units, where everybody is able to find some dignity and justice in the processes that they're involved in, and also in the governance systems that also they are connected to. Next slide. I'll very briefly just highlight the strategic plan that is guiding us, the 2024 to 2029 strategic plan, which largely is anchored on two operational areas, where we are to advocate for the discipline, the values, methods of community development, and also champion community participation and empowerment, and issues of solidarity that are also finding importance, and the issue of agency, where again we want to have everybody being able to exercise their citizenship in a way that is dignified. And then as an association, we are working towards supporting and engaging with members in the field to promote networking, practice exchange, professional development and collaboration. And that's part of this network. And also why we also talk about the World Community Development Conference is an opportunity for us to come together as with those with the membership and those beyond to reason together and to see how we can elevate the status of community development globally. And of course, the third strategic objective is about governance, so that then we remain a viable and responsible agency for in the interest of community development, and also holding public trust and promoting it for the benefit of society. Next slide. As I said earlier on, the standards are about providing some clarity and understanding on what community development is. And after a whole process of consultation, and also with the support of Community Learning and Development Standards Council of Scotland, this document was eventually discussed, agreed, adopted, and launched officially during the first World Community Development Conference in Maynooth in Ireland 2018. This is the first time we talked about the World Community Development Conference. Prior to that, we were talking about a Community Development Conference, but this was the first time we were talking about the World Community Development Conference, and it was seminal that then we would have this document shared. Of course, there's a continuing agenda and adoption, and we are promoting its adoption and use across the regions. Next slide. In that case, then, what has happened since the adoption of the standards in 2018? It is again, we have gone through our process of translation into some of the major languages globally. And so far we have translations in 17 languages, and we have a few more language translations that are underway. And we're asking you again, if you can take it up and promote it in the language that is widely used in your region or in the place where you are located. You are welcome, and we can get it done. We can guide you on how to do it. What we are saying is that we have the 17 already translated into these languages, the major languages. The main UN language that is not in place now is the Arabic. Otherwise, you have catered for all the other UN languages, where we have S with a short version of the standards. But otherwise, this is work in progress. We want to appreciate since 2018 to present, this is a commendable work, and we encourage you again to get in touch, to look the standards up in our website for your continuous engagement. We have already sent copies to members. Next slide. The standards, as we are talking about promoting the adoption and use, they will describe the knowledge, they will describe the understanding, they will describe the skills, and also embody the commitment, so that we can ensure that we have a practice that is recognized, that is consistent, and also implemented in a very competent way. Because again, as we give the standards, we also explain how these standards could be used so that then it starts making sense to us as practitioners, whether in academic or in practice with communities. Next slide. And so using the standards is largely to provide a framework for us. Of course, there is a whole process of reflection and action, so that ultimately it becomes a tool to guide us, rather. And so in our discussion, so that is not so much prescriptive or as instructions of this is how you are going to do it, but it provides context, and we also are aware of the fact that we come from different settings, different context, be they social-cultural, be they political, economic, or even religious for that matter. And so we need to be able to, as we talk about the standards, to be also sensitive to the context where the communities and the community development process or practice is taking place. so that then we become respectable, and that is the ethical imperative again of having these standards in place. And therefore, we're asking that in as much as we adopt and use them, we also see how we can domesticate them to fit our circumstances. Next slide. And so generally, in the interest of time, you can see from the columns provided, these are standards that we can use with communities in terms of facilitating decision making and even coming up with strategies of how to address the concerns within communities. We can also use them in community development training, and therefore we can even embody them and incorporate them in the curricula, so that then as we develop the new generation of community development practitioners, then the standards become mainstreamed in curriculum. The standards could also be used in research, so that again, we can be able to gauge what exactly is happening and what are the minimums that are acceptable, that then guide our research process as researchers, and also with the research subjects or participants that we are involved with. The standards could also be used as part of developing organizations and even assessing organizational development in terms of how responsive our organizations are to community development as an organized discipline and as a discipline that has values and methods. And then, of course, we can also use the standards as part of developing staff and the people, where again we look at what are the skill sets that we need to scale up within the people that we are working with or that are working in community development. And then lastly, for individual use, because at the end of the day, community development, in as much as is a broad discipline, we also need to define ourselves as practitioners. What is it that defines what we do in community development? And therefore, the standards also become a tool against which we can gauge ourselves and our practice and how we are defining our practice as individuals in terms of then how we measure up to what is the minimum that's acceptable in operationalizing our practice as individuals. Next slide. So the standards are organized in 8 thematic areas, starting with putting values into practice, where the understanding is that the starting point is establishing what is it that is important to communities, what is it that is important to the people that are involved in community development, the practitioners in the communities that we work with. And that provides now the true north in terms of then what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, what is right and what is wrong, as defined by the codex. And then once that is in place, then the issue of how do we engage with the communities, and what are the guidelines, what are the standards, what are the minimums that are acceptable. Then ensuring participatory planning, so that then we move forward in an organized manner, but also guided by the voices of the input of the voices of everybody. And then organizing for change. Community development is about change. How do you organize change and ensure again the change is in ways that again benefit all the actors in community development. Then the issues of learning for change. What are the lessons that we need to draw forward? How do we incorporate them? So that then we are talking about a live document, a live practice, and then building leadership and infrastructure so that we can support community development. And then the issue of developing and incorporating our practice into policy, so that then we can mainstream and institutionalize these standards in, so that then we are guided. Increasingly, each other country is developing policies to guide their key thematic areas that are important in society. In our in this side of where I'm located, we have a community development policy that is developed by the government, so that it guides what happens in community development in this country. And that's what we are talking about then. How do we ensure that policy as is developed, then it reflects the true north of community development. And then lastly, we recognize that we are all not the same, and also there is diversity that needs to be taken care of and incorporated in as we take and respected as we undertake community development. And we also need to be as inclusive as possible, aware that we have the many we are, we also have diverse needs and diverse situations and diverse interests that need to be taken into account, so that we talk about an inclusive and a caring discipline. The next slide. And so at this stage, we want to now take some deep dive into the thematic areas of the standards, starting with theme number 1, which is values into practice. And I will invite Janine to take us through the 4 sets of themes, and then DeWitt will come to do the other set of 4, and then we'll come back and have a discussion. Thank you. Welcome, Janine.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks, everybody. So yes, Daniel has very clearly laid the foundation for us. And so looking more specifically, more in detail at theme number 1, putting values into practice. It's the whole idea that we need to have that, the principles and the values of community development that Daniel outlined as the basis for our practice. Because if we know that we are all focusing on those agreed principles and values, then we know that we're working towards a common goal. So theme number 1 is understanding the values, the processes, and the outcomes of community development and applying these to practice. And if you think, you see the little diagram there, if we think of an iceberg, often all that is seen visually in a community is what people are doing. But we all know that if we have a common base with the actual bulk of the iceberg is under the surface, and we are in agreement about the principles and the values of what we do, then our practice is informed by that. So this really, the first theme is very much a foundational aspect of community development standards. Next slide, please, Jessica. And then once we know that we have this common starting point, how do we engage with communities? This is critical, because how we enter into groups, how we join in with communities is so critical to the kind of outcomes that we're going to have. So the second theme, engaging with communities, focuses on getting to know the communities that we're working with, understanding the various issues that impact on them, and developing the relationships that provide the basis for working for positive change. Too often people are, as practitioners, we are in a hurry and we want to rush in and just get a project done and sorted and get the reports to the funders. But oftentimes that will then lead to very short outcomes or less than desirable impact. And so if we focus and take time on engaging with communities, learning to understand the unique context and perspective and makeup of any community that we work with, because each one is different, we can then develop strong relationships that will then provide the basis for working for positive change. And it's not just understanding, understanding the issues that are affecting people, but understanding their strengths and the assets which they have in that community that they can then work with to help themselves in whatever change they are desiring. Next slide. So then leading on from that, once we have engaged effectively with the community, built relationships, we then need to understand that the community is part of their own engagement and their own decision-making and their own planning. So we need to understand, develop, and support collaborative working and community participation, making sure that we empower partnerships and support communities and agencies to be able to develop the skills to sustain themselves when they are doing planning. So it's not just a once-off thing, but if they have the skills that are developed in a planning process, the first time round perhaps, they then have those skills which are there for them to be able to carry on forward and continue to sustain their own development going forward. And then theme number 4 is to organize for change. So you can see there's a kind of a progression of when you start with the values, then you move on, then you engage with communities, get them to be part of their own planning processes, and then organizing for change, enabling communities to take collective action, increase their influence, access the resources that they need, and participate in managing and delivering services. So this focuses on getting people into a group, helping them to organize and identify the opportunities and the needs that are out there, to plan and to organize as a group, to take the collective action, develop the skills which they need for making something happen. They take the action, develop whatever activities and projects they have thought of, and then to evaluate to see the effectiveness and the impact of that action, and then reflect and think about, okay, how did that go? Did we achieve what we hoped for? What was missing? What could we have done better? And then that reflection may well lead to identifying new opportunities and possible needs that still need to be addressed, so that we then plan, organize again, take action, evaluate, reflect, and carry on. So it's a moving circle that is a continuous thing. But the idea of the organizing for change is that we are helping to develop the skills that community groups would need for them to be able to sustain and support any positive change going forward. So that covers the first 4. And then from the next slide onwards, I will hand over to my colleague Devet, and he'll take you through the remaining 4 themes. Thanks, Devet.
Thank you, Janine. This reflection for change is so important, because if we don't accommodate this change and evaluate the change, we won't grow as a community and as community practitioners. Therefore, this theme of learning for change is to support organizations and people that are involved in these communities. We all have to take note and learn from each other to take the way forward. And that brings up the 2 words. It is to facilitate this change. It is not to dictate the change. So this is a very important difference that we have captured in our values, and that is that it is community-led participation. It is not community engineering. Community engineering is a very, very negative element, because its lifespan and shelf life is very short. When communities get involved and prioritize their change initiatives, and the community development practitioner could integrate that into the community as a learning experience. You could see this bird there. It's got quite a number of colors. It is the inclusion of people, of organizations, and to learn for change, to take this instrument forward, what we call community development. Next slide, please. Now, diversity and inclusion is very important. Often we ask the question, whose development are we talking about? And to get to grips with that, the community development practitioner would have to be able to step back and take note of what is this, who is and what entails this community that we're talking about. We have to design and deliver practice, policy structures, and a program that will recognize and respect the diversity that we have in communities. It's such an important element of our activities, that this inclusion of the community as a whole. We have to include, and that would include the stakeholders. A lot of people are involved in communities that are outside, and we have to play this catalyst role of bringing them all together. The community development practitioner, what we understand here under diversity and inclusion is that we don't ostracize ourselves from the community. The community development practitioner has to respect the diversity and accommodate that without dictating what is good and what is bad. Though we do have the values of democracy, we do have the values of bottom-up approach, we do have the values of using the community knowledge that are there. This part diversity and inclusion is a very difficult element for a lot of practitioners. Depends on the type of community you work in. But we have to be able to merge this and fuse diversity, accept it and embrace it, but to bring it into inclusion as a community. Next slide, please. Very important element is that we all have to learn. And to learn, we have to bring leadership and infrastructure together. It focuses, this theme basically focuses on empowering leadership in and with the communities, developing infrastructure, community development, for sustainable change. And a very important element for sustainable change is it must be community buy-in. So that is where this concept of social engineering is a misconcept in community development. It doesn't fit in there. It is this buy-in for sustainable development. We have to facilitate and support all the organizations and infrastructure that's available and steer and facilitate the direction to improve the quality of life of everybody involved in the target population. It focuses on empowering the leadership in the community, and in the end, ladies and gentlemen, to develop the sustainable social change program. Change, as Daniel said in the beginning, change is inevitable when we talk about development. But it is a very, very important element that should be dealt with very, very cautiously, because any form of change would have some areas of disruption. Communities and everybody, you and me and every one of us, we are not so comfortable with change as we purport to be. Change has the potential to disrupt the community. You go into a community and just think that I'm going to get this thing right from your perspective as a practitioner, you got it all wrong. And this is where the facilitation comes in. This is where the empowering of the leadership within the community comes in. This is where the infrastructure should be developed to promote orderly change for the better of everybody involved. Next slide, please. The last one from my perspective here that I have to present is developing and improving policy and practices. In the end, we have values, we have standards for community development practitioners. This is a very exciting phase of community development that we are in at the moment. We are developing a discipline, it's in the process of being refined. We are developing a professionalism, a conduct that is appropriate for community development practitioners to adhere to. It is not a free-for-all that you go into a community, you can do what you want. But what is important is we have to take note of what works, and we also have to take note of what did not work. And it is this sharing of information as the community development practitioners and international associations for community development, this is where it all should come together. And we should not shy away from sharing with each other what did not work. That is how we grow. And it's such a shame that sometimes we always hear the good news and the good news and the good news. That doesn't necessarily take us forward. What did not work is extremely important, just as important as what worked. And that is how community development as a practice, as leadership, as the infrastructure, how we develop it. It is to facilitate and support this organizational development and infrastructure for community development, promoting and providing empowerment leadership. It all has to do with putting your hand on paper. you have to monitor, you have to check, you have to design techniques to see what happened, what worked and what did not work, how well did it work, and so forth. So it is critical that all community development practitioners would document and reflect on their practices and their activities. This is how we take the standards forward. This is how we could see where are the areas that we should avoid or not focus on, and which are the areas that we could focus on for positive change. And I like to use the word to improve the quality of life of everybody in the communities. And that means we have to incorporate everybody. We have to bring in all stakeholders. We have to share views. We have to share leadership. Too often we find that communities and the members don't know what they don't know. It is the work of the community development practitioner to reveal, to have this extra view, this view of what works in a community and reflect that back to the community so that we all know what we do know. Thank you, Daniel. This is where I end my presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Janine. Thank you, Dewitt, for the sharing and taking us through the 8 thematic areas. And so at this stage, we want to open up the discussion for clarifications and any further input. There's a question about whether the slides will be shared and all. When we started, we said that this session is being recorded. So the recording is, when it's processed, is going to be archived in the YouTube IACD YouTube channel for us to access. The main document, the standards document, is available on the website, and we'll also make available the slides to those who registered through the link that was shared, because at least we have your email addresses. And so these are part of the dissemination, so that then we can be able to have shared resources to guide our common practice. So thank you so much. Let me open the floor for any intervention.
Daniel, there's a good question from Chloe to say, are there any tips on how to advocate for the sector? The geopolitical climate is very unstable. In Ireland, community development sector has had major cuts in the crash of 2008, and they haven't even recovered yet in terms of staff and funding, and are anxious that they will be one of the first to be cut again if there's another crash. How are other countries ensuring that community development remains high on the agenda of politicians and prioritized and valued? Have other countries used the standards from IACD to help influence political decision makers, perhaps?
Yeah, quite an interesting question. And
Sorry, it may not be straightforward. There may not be no answer. I'm not looking for right or wrong, but just maybe any feedback or thoughts on other countries, or are you facing similar situations as we are?
well, I think what we can say right away is that this is one of the sectors, the social sector is one of the sectors that suffers easily whenever there are challenges with budget and the resource envelope that's available to governments, because they are very easy to cut back. And given that, again, the organized voice is not as strong, and so you find the cutting back the social sectors services becomes a lot more easy to deal with. And you can see what has happened with the collapse of the United States Agency for International Development. It was easily collapsed, and with that, a lot of communities are suffering, and therefore governments have to find ways of stepping up to address some of very critical concerns. In our country, we are talking about basic, for instance, access to healthcare, where we were receiving support from USAID, and programs had already been developed, including care for HIV and AIDS services, and those ones just collapsed. The government budgets have already been done, so people have to run all over the place to see how to plug that in the short term. And of course, a lot of jobs have fallen across the globe when USAID resources have also become unavailable. And so what has happened is that then, in view of this part of what we're talking about, the issue of policy, so that then once we have community development policy in place, then of course what follows in, it becomes mainstream in government systems. And therefore, as a matter of course, then resources have to be provided for. And if there is going to be any cut, then everybody can already start saying that this is already promised in the government systems. How do you cut it? And if you cut it, what happens to those, especially in the bottom of the pyramid or the most vulnerable? And of course, the alternatives with the experience of USAID collapse and also the increasing cutback of resources that are available is looking at what are the alternatives. And community philanthropy is become an option. And of course, some of the foundations, the rich foundations have come in to see how they can fill the gaps in those areas the governments are not able to do it. But community philanthropy has become quite an important area of focus. And equally, the whole issue of we have the promoters of ABCD approach in community development, asking ourselves, when this government system collapses, what exactly happens? And so we start looking at what are the resources that we have in the communities. Many of them, we don't see them because the government is already pouring resources and blindsiding us to the fact that we already have resources, we already have gifts, we already have systems in place which we can fall back on, and even in some cases, build back better than what the government is doing. When you talk about also issues of integrity across the globe, which is part of what has come up with the evaluation of for instance, the functioning of the USAID projects across the globe. So, but that's a quick feedback. Of course,
Thanks.
when we look at the documents, Ireland is said to be the richest country on the globe. And so when the richest country is already saying there's problem, you can imagine what is happening to the rest of the countries downstream. But this is a wake-up call for all of us so that we can be able to ask ourselves, supposing the governments continually keep on cutting back with the standards, we need now to push so that there's a policy in place. And when you have a policy in place, that's a promise to the community that this needs to be in place at all times. And therefore, we can always now pitch our voice and claim what is of matter of right needs to be in place. Thank you. Fiona, great to see you, and I hope you are harvesting the conversation.
Are you hoping I'm drawing, Daniel, as well? So I just wanted to add into that as well that in Australia, we're definitely seeing that happening at the moment. There's just a massive decrease in community support, community projects, anything community-led. We have got a lot of pushback. And one of the things that has happened in the last 12 to 18 months is a large group of the extremely wealthy philanthropics in Australia have come together with a whole lot of people from the social sector, and they've created a group called PLACE, PLACE. And what they're doing is they're actually creating an opportunity to have the filter of the needs, the wants, the community projects, the community voices, the great stuff that's happening, escalated and elevated directly to the philanthropics, who can therefore then influence the government systems as well. So it's in its infancy at the moment. It was tried many years ago in a different way, not necessarily through the philanthropics. I'll find the link and put it in a chat so you can all have a look at it. But it is underpinned by They're running a listening tour at the moment where they're going around Australia and they're actually going to where things are working, and they're putting together processes and helping people understand what is needed in policy change and to influence that and to keep it on the table. So there is some support on the ground here as well. As practitioners, we've been watching it with eagle eyes as well, because we also know that when there's money around, different things happen in different ways. And we also, part of what they've done is put in place basically an integrity committee. A group of people across all of Australia have applied to basically keep them on track and make sure that everything is, not going sideways and lining the pockets of people that don't need it, but actually seeing the money go back into community rather than other government pockets. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Janine.
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, I think that having been involved in community work for nearly 40 years now, I'm giving away my grey hair. I've been saying from way back that, let's look at what we have available. I think it's a basic thing. For so long, for so many decades, the people in communities feel like they have to wait for someone else to come and fix them or pay for them or give them something. And, when I've seen what's happening in places, what is available, it's just incredible. We just need to flip the minds of people to say, just look at what you have around you. And that is the basis for the whole asset-based community-led development thing, is to start where you are, use what you have and do what you can. And I know it's very easy to say that, and when there's big policy things like national and international HIV programs and so on, it's not an easy thing. But I think it's just that whole mindset that if you can help people to change how they look at things, they don't have as their first point of action is hands out mentality to say, give me. But it's to start by saying, okay, let me look around. What do I have? What can I do for myself? Who can help me in my community? How do we start at that community level and do something for ourselves? And that will then pull in philanthropic support and, other people who will see this and say, right, I would like to invest in this because I can see something happening on the community level. So that for me is, in a way, it's an exciting time. It's a scary time because we're so used to having funding coming in. But I think it's a bit of a kick in the back end where we can now start saying, well, okay, hang on a minute, let's just go back to basics. So I think, yeah, in a way, it is an exciting time for us to be able to think of what is possible from a community place-based perspective. Jim.
And Janine, oh, sorry, go, Jim.
Carry on.
Yes, I think that Chloe and Fiona are raising some interesting kind of questions here, and I think there are some challenges for the future, and in relation to IACD being clear of in a sense who it believes should actually own the economy. Who owns the economy? And I think that's a very, very serious issue. And I think out of today's debate, I would hope that as we move towards the next World Conference in Glasgow, then we might have a bit of a space for what the Scottish Government has tried to do around the nation of community wealth building. What does that actually mean? And we've touched this before, but I think we're raising these issues as to whether community development actually believes that that we should have what's the value called plural ownership of the economy. Who actually owns the economy? What is actually happening on an international basis? It's a kind of one-directional thinking, the assumption that economic growth actually also leads to kind of community growth, and that has to really be looked at and thought about. And I think that we've identified these a few times over the last year, and maybe the Glasgow conference being in Scotland, can get some focus on that business of plural ownership of the economy. Do we actually believe that? What does that actually mean? You know, and I think that's the question, that we don't rely on just a budget, you know, to solve the problem, but we want a budget that will actually change the economy really, and have that vision. So I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think you've just put your hand up for being one of the presenters at the World Conference. I've made a note, Jim. Thank you. Fiona, you wanted to add?
Yeah, but I went down a rabbit hole with what Jim was saying then. So I was just thinking about, you know, the community ownership, and if that's the minimum I can support people to recognize they have got ownership and power, then that's what I think is a really good thing. But seeing that at the moment, the small changes, the 0.5% change, that makes me so happy when you can see someone in community or someone, you know, making positive contribution to community because they feel they then can. And I think that's what we've taken away with removal of volunteering. Like, volunteering is becoming less and less and less and less in Australia. Massive problem. And more people are starting to, and I'll throw it out there, but a lot of the not-for-profit organisations who are getting funding, they're paying people to do volunteering work. So nobody wants to volunteer unless they're going to get something out of it anymore. So we've somehow socially confused everybody that it's actually okay to volunteer and that we don't need financial remuneration for just putting our hand up because we feel good doing it. And so now some of the organisations that I've been doing some work with, recognizing that in their budgets, they're putting in $10,000 to cover off giving people vouchers and all of those types of things to turn up at meetings or to turn up at an event. Or if you help at this event, we'll give you a $100 Coles Myer voucher or something like that. So it takes away that incentive of just socially connecting and doing something that feels good. We don't recognize that human feeling good to volunteer is such an important part of our social blanket that's woven all together. So yeah, very interesting. And I'm coming to listen to Jim when he talks at the conference.
Great.
Chloe, did you want to add something?
I was just going to add, and I totally relate to Fiona's point, and definitely post-COVID and amongst my own friends, family, people, it's definitely hard to see that motivation to volunteer and get back out. In a lot of rural communities in Ireland, and I worked on the offshore islands, so they're even more geographically isolated and smaller populations. It's the same people putting their hand up, it's the same people doing all the stuff, and they almost feel burnt out. But then for me, I kind of have this little bit of resistance around the state and stuff as well, because in the cities where there's kind of unbalanced regional development, there is services provided. Whereas when you become more geographically isolated and rural, there's this over reliance on people to provide for themselves. So it's hard to balance that. And you can see why some people are becoming frustrated and saying, well, why should I volunteer when my aunt in the next county is being paid? So there's that argument as well, but it's about trying to instill the values of volunteering, that human feel-good connection, while also where the state needs to provide services, there's a push and that political part of community development that is actually done. So I don't know if I'm articulating the point there, but there's that kind of tension between the two pieces.
Sure.
A quite interesting perspective, because again, the issue of voluntarism has also been pushed beyond the limit, in the sense that governments avoid their responsibility of providing services and building structures to support community work by letting people just do it for free, and failing to realize at the end of the day, people have real bills to pay. And in as much as they can contribute out of the richness of their heart, that body needs to be filled with material stuff and for sustenance, out of which, of course, there is need for some money to be put on the table to make that possible. And going back to what Jim is indicated, is a very important question. Whose development? And if anything, why is the government in place? If now they are saying the government is put in place out of social contract to take care of the interests of the people. And now, so when now they decide they are going to cut back and not sustain the needs of the people, and especially those who are at extreme need, then we start asking ourselves, does the government then have any legitimacy to be where they are? And more so, as Chloe is indicating, where again there is going to be asymmetry in terms of responding to the needs, to the extent that the needs of those who are clearly not as pressing are taken care of, while the needs of those who are not visible or easily excluded are not taken care of. And so and that's where now we're talking about with the standards, looking at how inclusive our processes are and how inclusive we can be in terms of also calling for the government systems to respond to especially the voices of those who are not likely to be heard. Let's do it.
I would like to come in from a slightly different angle, and I hear what Chloe is saying, but we must present ourselves. It seems to be that the people tend to think community development in the budget process in countries' governance is a disposable, and that we as community development practitioners are disposable. So yes, if we have to cut money, we cut that side. I think we must do some introspection also. Why are we seen as a disposable? And we must be able to get closer into the engine room and be part of the decision making. But then we must have a professional input to where decision making could take note of us. And I think that is very important for the standards that we're talking about now, to get some order in the house. We must be there where decisions are made. If we're not there, we must ask ourselves, why were they not thinking about us? So, and I think part of the reason is that a lot of our work in the past and documented work is about charity work. Community development is much more than that. It is to address Jim's problem. Who are the community? What are their role? What's their role in the economic sector? So I think it is very important that we should professionalize our inputs and be taken note of. If we're not going to do that, it's going to be an uphill battle. We must present ourselves as sought after people to politicians, as well as to bureaucrats, as well as to planners, because we work interdepartmental, interdisciplinary, but we have a community development focus as a discipline. And I think we must push that agenda very hard. Thank you.
Great. Looking for any further interventions, further questions?
Could we ask Daniel if Oana from Romania is finding this discussion helpful?
Yes,
Great.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you so much for your insights and your experience. I'm playing with this concept of community building, but I was not involved in, let's say, in an action way in different parts of the society. But for sure, from my perspective of communication and community building, I have a lot of ideas right now. For sure, right now I want to become a member, and I want to look for the resources first. And after that, I will see what other ideas will come. Also, I was looking for in fact, I found out first about the conference from next year in Glasgow. And after that, I found out about this talk. So I will look more on the resources and everything, and hopefully next year I will be in Glasgow because it's much easier to be in person and to talk with each one in person. Lovely. I love this internet and the fact that we can be from all over the world in one meeting, but conferences are a magic space for me. So that is the learning from my point of view. That is the learning space that I'm looking forward to see. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Anna.
Hello, Daniel.
Yeah,
Once
Ogato.
again, I want to thank I want to thank the presenters. There is no doubt about the fact that these international standards are very, very important when it comes to the practice, having uniformity of practice, and in fact, having very standard procedures in approaching community development. And one of the pillars, as I like, has to do with knowledge. And if we must have commonality of knowledge, I again want to draw your attention, and perhaps to that of Professor DeWitt, to the efforts we made some time ago about this certification program. Because for us to ensure that the practice appears to be uniform, arising from a knowledge base, I think we need to revisit this. I know we had itches here and there, especially having to do with this certification program. But I think we should not lose sight of it. I think it should be revisited. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And I think we're at a point where this issue can be taken care of. There has been some discussion at within IACD in some direction in that about a certification of sorts, and I think we'll reconvene our group that was discussing, and then we can find a way forward as a region how to take forward the agenda of professionalization as DeWitt is indicated and certification as Ogato is indicating. Yes, John.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, I'm agreeing with the certification point. That's very important. Happy to offer support to that group when the time comes there. I think we discussed that a while ago, Daniel. But the other thing, I mean, I really enjoyed the presentation. I think there's a lot there, and although I've been a member a few years now, I'm just still learning the standards, and I think that means internalizing them, and you know, they're very useful. One thing stood out for me around the point about documentation, and I think IACD has really made a great effort to focus on documentation, because that's a big area of weakness, I think, in many places. You know, people tell you about, oh, there was this great project. Even me, I told you about a great session yesterday. I'm not quite sure how we're going to document it, you know, and I think, you know, it's not that you have to write big reports about everything, but finding ways to capture some of the good practices and some of the mistakes, as was said, you know. I think that's so important, and yeah, I just want to credit IACD for really doing a lot in that area and constantly pushing it. That's it.
Thank you, John, and appreciate what you're saying. Documentation, of course, it's always important, because if you don't have a permanent record to keep on guiding us, becomes quite problematic. And we have the standards in place. We also have the Practice Insights magazine, which is a rolling project of IACD. And so you're welcome also to contribute. And then, of course, the proceedings of this webinar series, which we have in this region and also the other regions. Also, the fact that we're archiving them and also putting the documentation in the website, of course, continues to enrich the database that we have. And so thank you very much, and it's an important point. Now, there being no further intervention, I've put on the chat the topic for the next edition coming up in June 11th, 2021, addressing care as a societal or community issue, lessons in implementation, and this is a follow-up to an earlier discussion on care as a societal issue presented by Bob and Chris from UK. They are coming again with a larger group to make a presentation and to lead this discussion next month. So you are welcome. Be on the lookout for the specifics. I'm reading the post by Nikki Green to see whether there is any question, but says she has to run off. Thank you very much. And Practice Insights magazine information has been shared. We're already doing an edition on cooperatives. If you're interested, please submit your proposal.
Daniel, may I come in here? I want to
The
make a
Practice
comment.
Insights magazines. Sorry, David.
I just want to make a comment. John just triggered something with me. You know, we are so the sharing of experiences, documentation of experiences. Maybe we should, at some stage in Sub-Saharan Africa section, we should have a webinar on what did not work, lessons that don't work. We so focus on the positive things, but that we share in practice, reality, projects that didn't work. And then we could have a discussion on how could that have been avoided, and that will take us many steps forward. It could be a very intriguing discussion, having a discussion on failures and why.
Well, that will be an interesting one, and I'm inviting you to lead that one in August. We have a slot that's open, because as you talk about that, I'm reminded of an article published in the Community Development Journal by Charlie McConnell and Paul LaChapelle on the 7 sins of community development. And so going in that direction, I think that would be useful, just to follow up on those 7 sins and also see what is it that is not working, even as you look at the 7 sins of community development as presented by Charlie McConnell and Paul LaChapelle. Paul was our president, our past president of IACD, and continues to be engaged. So thank you very much. So I think we're at a point where we can say goodbye and thank you all for being available to take this discussion to this level. There's going to be another edition later in the year, so be on the lookout. And this will be 2 editions. An edition to be presented in the Western Hemisphere because of the time zone issues, and also in the same day, another edition, the same, being presented to the Eastern Hemisphere, so that people in Oceania can have a time that is reasonable for them to be up. And so that's the whole idea of having 2 sessions. And then early in the year, we'll also have the same, so that we continue building a pool of us who are committed to promoting the standards and with having a common understanding of where we are and where we need to go forward. So I'm seeing a lot of colleagues here. Greetings to you, and through you, greetings to our friends. Fiona, greet our friends in Oceania. Thank you so much for hosting us 2023. It was wholesome. Okay. And we are glad that you're able to join us. Chloe, thank you hosting us 2018 Community Work Ireland, the first World Community Development Conference. Pass our regards to Anastasia and the colleagues.
Yes, thank you. We look forward to seeing you all in Scotland. Hopefully we can meet up. It'll be nice next year.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So all the best and thank you very much. Have a good day and whatever time you're in. Blessings.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.